Good evening. My name is Jim Leach, and on behalf of the Institute of Politics of the Kennedy School, I welcome all of you to this John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. Tonight, our topic is Iraq, which is probably the most vexing policy for our government and for the American people. For foreign regulars, you know, we have discussed the subject of Iraq from a number of different perspectives, and this evening we have the good fortune to have a foreign dignitary with great experience in the arena. The Iraqi Foreign Minister, Hoshar Zebari. The Foreign Minister is going to talk for 20-25 minutes on the subject of the future of Iraq. Afterwards, we will open, as is the custom of the forum, the speaker to questions from the audience. When it comes time to speak, we have a long tradition of civility and respect for the speaker and for the audience itself, and so we'll ask that questions be brief. To introduce the Foreign Minister, I want to bring to the podium Dr. Megan O'Sullivan, who until recently served as the Deputy White House National Security Advisor for Iraq and Afghanistan. Megan has spent 2 tours as a civilian of duty in Baghdad. She holds degrees from Georgetown and Oxford, and this semester serving as a fellow at the Institute of Politics, where she's leading a study group on Iraq. Please welcome to the podium Dr. Megan O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Congressman. It is a great personal and professional pleasure to introduce the Foreign Minister of Iraq, Hoshar Zebari, to you tonight. Those of you who have spent time in Iraq may be aware of this phenomenon I call Iraqi time. So much happens in Iraq that a week's events are squeezed into every day. And in this constantly changing environment, there are very few constants. But the Foreign Minister has been one of those constants. Iraq has had 4 governments in 4 years, the last 4 years, and Minister Zebari has been the Foreign Minister in each of those governments. And an impressive Foreign Minister he has been. He has overseen, and in some cases orchestrated, the movement of Iraq from an international pariah state in the 90s to a recognized member of the international community. He's been involved in bringing the UN back into Iraq. Just this summer, Iraq had the distinction of having the UN pass an expanded mandate for its activities in Iraq. He's been very involved in reestablishing Iraq in the region and in the Arab world. And this is not an easy feat for someone who is personally an Iraqi Kurd representing an Arab majority country in the Arab world. And he's been involved in developing new mechanisms to support Iraq in the international community, be it the International Compact, where more than 70 countries have committed to supporting Iraq in political and economic endeavors, or in the Neighbors Conference, where foreign ministers get together every few months to talk about the challenges to Iraq and the region. Now, in shepherding Iraq through this process, the foreign minister has not been shy. He has used bold words to publicly hold to account countries and governments that have not supported Iraq sufficiently or that have actually taken action against Iraq's interest inside and outside Iraq. Now, of course, Foreign Minister Zebari's political involvement did not begin when he became foreign minister. He has been involved with the Iraqi state in one way or another for a long time. In the 1980s, he was a Peshmerga, and that is a Kurdish guerrilla fighter. He was in the mountains of the northern parts of Iraq fighting Saddam's regime. Now, for those of you in our military are here tonight, you might be interested to know that he credits that experience as being the one to develop the skill that has served him best as Iraq's chief diplomat, and that is the ability to catch a wink of sleep at any given moment. I guess if you can get a good night's sleep riding on the back of a mule holding an AK-47 coming down a cold mountain, you can pretty much sleep anywhere. And in the 1990s, he became one of the chief spokesmen for the Iraqi opposition. This was a time when the Iraqi opposition knew that it needed to raise public awareness to get the attention of the US government. As the foreign minister has reminded me several times over the last day, the US government did not return his phone calls during this decade. So what he did was try to speak to as many audiences as possible. He defined himself as someone who was, quote, desperate for an audience. And the first audience given to him in the United States was actually here at Harvard. He spoke in '91 at the Center for Middle East Studies. He came back and spoke again in 1998 here at the JFK School. And at that speech, he was introduced, I guess I could say, perhaps more with the title he wanted than the title he had. He was introduced in 1998 as the Foreign Minister of Kurdistan. I call that a double aspiration. But tonight, I'm very happy to introduce him with a title that he both has and deserves and wants, and that is the Foreign Minister of Iraq, Hoshar Zebari.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me thank Dean Elwood, the Dean of Kennedy School, and Congressman Leach, head of the Institute of Politics. And also to thank you very much, Megan, for your introduction. I was really very moved by your introduction. I'm very happy to be here at the Kennedy School at Harvard University. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak at this very distinguished forum. Iraq is indeed a very important topic. And I think, as you do, that it is appropriate to provide a platform to a voice from Iraq. I see several friends here in the audience. This is not the first time I speak at this distinguished university, and I would like to contrast this visit now with my first visit here on March 7, 1991. The first Gulf War was ending, and no one had spoken out in the United States for the Iraqi people. In fact, all the doors in the administration were closed in the face of the Iraqi democratic oppositionists. So Professor Roy Muttahida gave us Iraqi opposed to Saddam, namely my friends Sayyid Muhammad Bahr al-Ulum, whom Megan you know very well, Dr. Ahmed Chalabi, another well-known name, Kanaan Makia, and myself, a platform from which to state our cause. The entire Iraqi population in Boston turned up. Some of them are here today, I believe. And the attendance outgrew the room given to us. We ended up giving our talks in the main entrance to people sitting on the floor in a semicircle around us. The main point I remember is how truly desperate we felt. Recall the circumstances. In spite of the monumental defeat of the Iraqi army and Republican Guards, Saddam Hussein retained enough troops and was given the ability to use them, particularly helicopters, gunships. The Republican Guards were reestablishing Saddam's rule, in the process ruthlessly crushing the popular uprising that has spontaneously taken over 14 of Iraq's 18 governorates. We felt betrayed by the United States and the world as a whole. People fearing for their lives and recalling the use of poison gas took off under harsh winter conditions to the mountainsides and to neighboring countries. Literally millions of refugees on the Turkish and Iranian borders. This was, in the words of one journalist, an exodus of biblical proportion. provide comfort and relief operation to help this population would not start for another month. Our fears were justified. Not only did Saddam remain in control, he had tens of thousands killed in the crushing of the uprising, and the Iraqi population had to endure more than a decade of his misrule, on top of which the international community imposed sanctions that did as much to hurt the population as it did to control the regime. And up to now, we are unearthing the remains of those people who were killed and buried in mass graves in the southern and northern provinces of Iraq. There was a silver lining, namely the setting up of the safe haven north of the 36 parallel line, roughly covering the Kurdish region. Under that cover, we were able, in the intervening years, to build democratic institutions that have formed the basis of a Kurdish regional government in Iraq. That was more than 16 years ago. Today, I'm speaking here as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iraq and a member of its first constitutional, democratically elected government in half a century. I am aware of the historic importance of the political transformation we are bringing about in our country and their implications for the region and the world. This transformation, in our view, is as important an event in the Middle East as any in the last 100 years. I have confidence in the future of my country, even if my optimism is tempered by awarenesses of the difficulties we are facing. These difficulties are to be expected, given the scope of the transformation and the magnitude of the interest at play. And let me say this: the United States are our ally and partner in our pursuit of freedom and human dignity, and their establishment on firm footing in Iraq. I gratefully acknowledge their historic role, honor and respect their sacrifice in this worthy cause, and salute their soldiers, standing side by side with our own on the front lines of the fight against a dark, violent, totalitarian ideology. I will first try to give you an idea about the importance of what is going on in Iraq, a level of importance such that success in Iraq will reverberate positively well beyond Iraq's border, regionally and globally. By the same token, the lack of positive outcome in Iraq will have serious negative repercussions regionally and globally. And I would say even further to say Iraq's failure means the region's failure, and nobody can benefit anything from that failure. I will give you a quick overview of the current situation in Iraq. Let me caution you, it is far from ideal, and we and our friends and allies are working hard to improve it. But given the very low point we started from after the fall of the dictator, we have achieved remarkable accomplishment, and I will tell you something about that. Finally, I will discuss the way forward, describing various actions we need to undertake. I will obviously speak about domestic issues, but being the foreign minister, I will focus on initiatives that involve the international community. First, let me talk about the importance of the truly historic transformation underway in Iraq. It is important because of what Iraq is and holds, and because of the enormous stakes in play. Iraq is not any country. It has significance both symbolic and tangible. It is the cradle of civilization. Writing was invented in Iraq, as were the wheel and the chariot. Iraq is the birthplace of Prophet Abraham, honored equally by the Jews, Christian, and Muslim faiths. It is the resting place of several imams honored by more than 1 billion Muslims of all sectarian affiliations. Baghdad, Iraq's capital, was the seat of the Islamic civilization at its apogee and was then the center of the civilized world. More recently, Iraq became the first country in the Arab Middle East to adhere to the League of Nations. It is a founding member of the United Nations. It is the first country in the Middle East to broadcast television program, to use a modern computer. Iraq is also home to the world's second largest proven reserves of easily extractable oil, and as yet untapped reserves of natural gas. It has water resources and an able population and arable land, and it is located strategically within easy reach of the Mediterranean and Africa bordering the Gulf, and through our good neighbors Turkey, NATO, and soon, we hope, the European Union. Now look at where Iraq was before it was liberated and the dictatorship unseated, and look at what we Iraqis are aspiring to. A free country, a united federal democracy, at peace with its neighbor and itself, well on its way to prosperity, well integrated in its region and the world, and where the state works to protect the rights of its citizens, regardless of who they are, and to ensure the optimal use of the country's resources. We are not there yet. The Iraq of the past witnessed tyranny internally and aggression externally. Its political leadership turned the whole country into a gigantic scene of crimes against humanity. In the course of the 15 years prior to 2003, this leadership invaded 2 neighboring countries and caused 3 wars, causing the deaths of millions. In contrast, the Iraq we are building will help stabilize the Middle East, lending support to moderate countries. It will deprive their enemies, our enemies, your enemies, from a powerful base which they could use to strike in quasi-immunity. Globally, a stable and secure Iraq will help stabilize energy markets and, by extension, the world's economy. A democratic Iraq will help counter the specter of the clash of civilization. In fact, Germany was the centerpiece of engagement between the United States, between the West and the East during the Cold War. We believe that during this period, Iraq or the Middle East, but Iraq would be the centerpiece also of continued US engagement. We shall succeed because we, and by we I mean Iraq and our allies, and indeed the whole international community, cannot afford to have our efforts in Iraq fail. If we fail, we may have a country torn apart by civil strife. That, remember, is a stated goal of our enemies. Terrorists will have safe havens, which they will turn into death triangles, from which they will strike other countries in the region and even further. And that will in turn destabilize the world's economy and raise global tension. Again, we cannot afford to let that happen. Let me now give you an overview of recent developments in Iraq. The situation is difficult and challenging, even critical, but it also includes many successes on which to build and so. We remain hopeful. Let me also say that the situation need not have been as difficult. Many mistakes were made by the United States, by us, by the Iraqis, and even by the United Nations. Before I proceed, I must emphasize, though, that reality in Iraq is complex and varied. even at times contradictory. It cannot be summarized in short sound bites or 2 minute video footages. Therefore, reductive descriptions and summary judgments of the situation should be avoided because they do not and cannot tell the real story. Because our time together is limited, I will focus on security, the dominant factor affecting the situation in Iraq, addressing other issues only in so much as they affect security. First, not all of Iraq is unsafe. There are several provinces, governorates, where the level of security is equivalent to that of many industrial and developing countries which are open to international travel. But in many other areas also, or in some neighborhoods in Baghdad, still the security situation is a major problem. In fact, many provinces in the south as well as in the north are safe and secure, and the Iraqi authorities, whether the administration, security forces, are in full charge themselves. There are multiple causes for the lack of security in Iraq. Iraq is confronted by a combination of desperate elements of the former dictatorship, sectarian zealots, international Takfiri jihadists, each for their own reasons. This unholy alliance has international support networks and considerable sources of foreign financing. They are not waging a civil war, but rather a war on civilians. With total disregard for the value of human life, they kill women and children indiscriminately. Lacking respect for anything sacred, they kill worshippers and blow up churches and mosques, including shrines of the highest religious importance, seeking to ignite sectarian strife. They have succeeded in part, but only in part. Sectarian tensions are now a factor we cannot ignore. If they have not succeeded fully, it is because the social fabric of Iraq is very strong. There is also the role of regional players. Not all our neighbors have been as supportive as we would like them to be. In fact, some have been intervening in our internal affairs in ways that have raised the level of violence in certain areas. This violence has created a large flow of Iraqis seeking safety in other regions of Iraq and in neighboring countries, particularly Jordan and Syria, stretching their resources and taxing their infrastructure. But that's not the whole story. We are acquiring the means to quell this violence, and we hope soon prevent it. Day after day, Iraq's armed forces and security forces are increasing in size and through training and better equipment, getting stronger and more efficient. They have fulfilled their duties admirably in the ongoing Operation Fard al-Qanun, or established law. Through the brunt of the fighting was carried out by the multinational forces, Iraqi soldiers have played an increasing role in the ongoing surge that has seen violence levels drop considerably. They have helped the multinational force recapture territories abandoned through lack of capacity to the insurgent. In some still too rare cases, they have allowed some displaced families to return to their homes. Even more importantly, it is the inhabitants of these territories, notably in the governorates of Anbar and Diyala, who are turning against the Al-Qaeda, in particularly against those insurgents affiliated or close to Al-Qaeda, and are joining the government's efforts in establishing the rule of law. Similarly, people in the country's southern governorates are turning against the extremist elements within the militias, found in these governorates. This shift in loyalties and alliances is creating a qualitative change in the political landscape of Iraq, strengthening the government, the political process, and national unity. These improvements in the internal situation are being mirrored by a more favorable outlook externally. Iraq, which has been isolated during decades, is now fully engaged internationally. We have resumed the full range of diplomatic activities. Iraq is back to take its seats in all major international and regional organizations. We have launched the International Compact with Iraq, co-chaired by Iraq and the United Nations. The compact is a partnership between Iraq and the international community to help bring about the Iraqi government's national vision. This partnership is based on mutual commitments by Iraq to undertake the necessary reforms and actions, and commitments by the international community to help Iraq achieve the goal through political support, technical assistance, and where applicable, financial contributions. The compact was launched on May 3, 2007 in Sharm el-Sheikh with more than 80 countries attending. Iraq, with the Foreign Ministry in the lead, has also been engaged in setting up a process of consultation and decision-making with our neighbors, and have expanded it to include the permanent members of the Security Council and the Group of 8 and other countries and institutions that have influence in the region. We have had a series of meetings in Baghdad and one meeting at the level of Foreign Minister held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt on May 4, 2007. This process has led to the formation of 3 technical committees to address one important issue each, namely security, energy, and displaced persons. These committees have made and will offer recommendations on these issues to the next ministerial meeting, which should take place around the end of, should take place in early November in Istanbul. One objective of this meeting is to reduce the level of regional interventions in our internal affairs. The Foreign Ministry has also organized a series of tripartite meetings attended by both the United States and Iran to discuss issues relevant to Iraq. In fact, this initiative to encourage a dialogue between the United States and Iran over stability and security in Iraq has taken a great deal of our time, but we have been successful to start the process, and we hope that this will continue because it's beneficial to Iraq and to other parties. We have thus been able to discern a perceptible shift in favor of Iraq by many countries, which until now had been much less engaged. These impressions were confirmed during a meeting last week at the United Nations in New York. For example, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has agreed to raise its level of diplomatic representation in Baghdad to the highest level. Many other countries, Islamic countries like Indonesia, like Azerbaijan, have also agreed to send their ambassadors to Baghdad. Also, the United Arab Emirates. 2 foreign ministers from key European Union countries, Sweden and France, recently visited Iraq. France, once the standard bearer against the US-led coalition in Iraq, is now eager to be much more engaged with Iraq. That is a notable development because France's increased engagement will likely mean a greater engagement by both the United Nations and by the European Union. To succeed, we need to make progress on 3 interdependent fronts: political inclusion and consensus building, security and establishment of the rule of law, and economic reform and reconstruction. We must continue to consolidate the political process and make it even more inclusive, reaching out to disaffected communities and addressing their legitimate grievances. We must further establish law and order by building up our institutions, particularly our armed forces, ensuring good governance and eradicating corruption. We must reform and develop our economy in order to rebuild and improve our infrastructure and provide better services to our citizens. But the buildup of the Iraqi armed forces, though ongoing, is not yet complete. This is why we have needed and still need the presence of the multinational force in Iraq in order to avoid a dangerous security vacuum. At the request of the Iraqi government, the Security Council has renewed its mandate for the multinational force every year and will, we expect, renew it again later this year. But this situation, permissible under Chapter 7, cannot go on forever. This is why we intend to engage in negotiations with the United States in order to reach an agreement on a long-term bilateral security arrangements similar to those found in the region. Establishing security will require that the state ensure a monopoly of arms. For historic and other reasons, there are many militias and non-official armed groups in Iraq. This is a serious problem. We must resolve this issue and implement national disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs, taking into account their social and economic impact, even if that puts further constraint on our resources. There are many other issues that I would like to discuss, for example, the economy or the Iraqi Council of Representatives legislative agenda, including the hydrocarbon law and the constitutional review, the de-Ba'athification laws. I do not have time to address these important issues now, but would be happy to do so in the question and answer period. Let me close by saying that the task facing us, Iraqi, is challenging. But as I said earlier, I'm confident about the future of my country. I'm confident because of what we have achieved since the downfall of Saddam Hussein's regime, and because no matter how close we came to the brink, the Iraqi people have risen to the occasion. And that is also why I'm proud to address you here as the Iraqi Foreign Minister. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
We will now go to questions, and I'll go around the room. I would again caution and ask people to keep their questions brief out of respect for the audience as well as the minister. We'll begin here.
Minister
And
Zebari.
if you could introduce yourself, that would be very good.
Minister Zebari, my name is Julia Arnous, and I'm a student at the college. My question for you is, without American protection, would you be killed by your fellow Iraqis? Thank you.
I really didn't hear the question. Could you repeat it? Sorry.
My question, Minister, is, without American protection, would you be killed by your fellow Iraqis? Thank you.
There is a problem between Iraqis themselves, definitely, but the American forces there, I think, are doing an honorable job of preventing that from taking place or continuing. Yes, there has been violence between the Iraqis in the past, in the history, but the presence of the American forces have helped to decrease that, as was the case during the launch of the Surge operation. Okay, thank you.
Go to this gentleman here.
Hello, Minister Zebari. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
My name is Tawfiq Rahim. I'm a MPP student here at the Kennedy School. My question pertains to one of your neighboring countries, Iran specifically, where we had the president of Iran visit the United States And as you know, Iran is part of the axis of evil, or so to speak. I wanted to ask you, what do you feel is the role of Tehran in Iraq? Are you disappointed that the US and Iran use Iraq as a proxy ground? And in your meetings with President Bush and Condoleezza Rice, do you express your disappointment in the United States' hard line and lack of diplomacy and communication with Iran?
Thank you. Well, as I said in my statement, really we are not happy and comfortable about the role of our neighbors, including Iran, in interfering in Iraq's internal affairs. At the same time, we know the rising tension between the United States and Iran over the nuclear file or program, over Iran's regional role, over Iran's influence in Lebanon, in Palestine, and Iraq, and the fear of this expansion of Iranian influence. At the same time, we recognize that we and Iran are two neighbors, are destined by geography, by history, to live together. The United States presence there is temporary. One day they would leave. We need to forge good neighborly relations, you see, with each other based on mutual respect and good relation. Yes, indeed, because of this conflict, this tension, Iraq and sometimes have become a battleground between the United States and Iran to settle scores. And the message we've been giving out to both, to keep their differences away from Iraq because we have too many things on our plate. And that has been the basis for us trying to engage or trying to establish some dialogue between the United States and Iran in Iraq. And we've succeeded in achieving that goal, which was a remarkable achievement, I think, after so many years of a complete breakup in diplomatic relations between the two countries. They met for the first time in Iraq to discuss Iraq stability and security. And so far, we have had 3 sessions. And this process is ongoing. We have been very clear with our Iranian neighbor and friends to tell them really, as if you have this policy of supporting the elected government, the legitimate government, the Shia majority government that is a friendly government to you, we need this support to be translated into action as well. I mean, that your statement of support, which we don't doubt that they are genuine, they are supporting the government, but that should not be undermined also by undermining the government through supporting militias or other groups, you see, or to bloody the Americans in Iraq in order to undermine or weaken the government. This is inconsistent. And we have spoken very clearly with the highest leadership in Iran. You see that, yes, we are neighbors, we want to live together, but at the same time, we, the Iraqis, are the one who are going to determine our future, to seek, to decide our options. What kind of a country we want to live without any domination and influence. Thank you.
We'll go up to this gentleman up here.
Hello, my name is Raul Prabhakar, and I'm a junior at Harvard College. Thank you very much for coming tonight, Mr. Zebari. My question regards the recent resolution passed by the United States Senate calling for the partition of Iraq to 3 regions. The Prime Minister has condemned the resolution, but it seems that of the 3 major groups, the Kurds are the only ones who support it, or many Kurds do at least. Have you experienced any personal tension in reconciling with what many in your home region feel with what the national government believes to be in its best interest?
Thank you. I think the Senate resolution created a great deal of debate back home in Iraq and also in the region. Unfortunately, it confused the Senate support for a federal Iraq and the Senate support for dividing Iraq. I think what the resolution intended is to establish a federal Iraq on 3 regions, on 3 ethnically, sectarianly based regions. These decisions, in my view, are up to the Iraqi people, you see, to make. It's true that 10 million Iraqi voted for their constitution, which established for a federal Iraq. Definitely a federal Iraq means Iraq would be based on a number of federal regions within a united democratic country. The problem here that if you divide the country along sectarian and ethnic lines, there are some mixed areas. You see how you're gonna draw the line. Many cities, the capital itself, it would be difficult. So that's why we believe that these decisions should be left for the Iraqi people, you see, to settle, to agree on what is the best solution for them or what's the best structure. What the Senate has introduced, I think all the people who signed that resolution are honorable people. Definitely, they have been following Iraq for many years, and they feel very anxious and uncomfortable about the development there. And this is one way to seek some solution. I mean, their premises is as long as these 3 communities are unable to live together, to coexist, let's better to put them each in their own region. But that's not a solution. There is not a magical solution for that. I think this needs to be discussed by the Iraqi to decide. Maybe they need more than 3 regions, 4 or 5 regions. You see, this would be up to the Iraqi parliamentarian, Iraqi legislator, and leaders, you see, to decide. So that is my response to that. I mean, no Iraqi is for dividing the country. Even the Kurdish region, in fact, they supported it because they felt that this is in line with the constitution that established for a federal structure in Iraq. Not they supported because it's called for dividing the country. Since I'll give you one piece of information now, the Kurdish region, although have enjoyed a great deal of autonomy in the past since 1991, but unless Baghdad stand by it or support it financially, it would not be able to survive for a long time. Thank you.
This gentleman, lady, excuse me. Over here. Thank you.
Hi, Minister Zabari. My question is about the political problems that Iraq faces that some consider even more pressing than the security issues. Some people in America have argued that whenever the United States leaves the region, the Prime Minister and the national government will be too weak to prevent the Shiite majority from exercising its political will and basically crushing the Sunni minority, and there's some signs of similar things happening already. How would you respond to those criticisms or those worries?
Well, I think I've been the constant advocate of asking for the multinational forces to remain until the mission is done, or until we get through this mission. There is a responsibility, I think, on all those countries who've helped to liberate Iraq from dictatorship. And the reasons, actually, the way we see it, if there would be any precipitous withdrawal, premature withdrawal of the forces, I can see 4 scenarios happening, and this is from experience, not from any self-interest. I think, first, the country then would be divided. If you remove this deterrence of this force in the country, I think the country is most likely to be disintegrated or divided. And it will become a reality, because each will go back to its own constituency as long as there is no movement on the political process. Secondly, this military presence has helped, especially recently, to control or rein the the flare-up of sectarian and civil war in the country. It's there, we are not denying it, but really it has been contained and has been averted, I would say. But the removal of this force now, I think, will lead to maybe an all-out sectarian or civil war. Third, if you see the tension building around Iraq, I mean, the withdrawal of the forces would lead to regional wars. And by the alliances, by the Shia with certain countries, by the Sunni Arabs with others, Turkey has its own interests also in the region. So this could lead to a greater war, let's say, in the entire region. It would not be in the interest of anybody at all. And also I would see that Al-Qaeda, terrorist group, really will establish itself in Iraq, and it will have Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It will have its base entrenched in Iraq, which is far more favorable culturally, socially, geographically than Afghanistan. So these are the possibility of that. I'm not being here trying to be alarmist. Definitely we, the Iraqis, can defend ourselves, protect ourselves. We cannot go on depending on foreign forces, you see, to protect us. I think we have the people, we have the means. And one fact is not mentioned here, that for each American soldiers are killed, you know, dozens of Iraqi army soldiers and police are killed, standing up to defend their country, their freedom. But given the means, provided the means, we will do so. The presence of the American forces is not open-ended there, definitely. They would be coming back after establishing a reasonable, secure environment for the government to be able to protect itself and defend itself. Thank you.
Excuse me, if we could go to a few more people, I think
Okay.
we'd appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
أهلا وسهلا سيادة الوزير.
أهلا بك.
My name is Basma Fakri. I'm an Iraqi American, and I have two questions for you. The first one is, are there Iraqi women as ambassadors? And if there are, how many? The second one, we hear horrible stories in the news about trafficking of Iraqi women in the neighboring countries, like Syria, Jordan, United Arab Emirates. Are there any efforts to try to alleviate this problem?
Thank you. We don't have any Iraqi ambassadors as such. We used to have one run in Washington. But in the next diplomatic list, I think you will have some Iraqi women also. But I can tell you in the cabinet, we have 4 female ministers, women ministers. And the foreign ministry, for your information, the percentage of female serving in Iraqi foreign service now is over 35%, both at home and abroad, which is a high percentage, I think, of women's participation. As for the trafficking, because of the unfortunate security and living conditions, really many Iraqi are leaving the country, not because of any discriminatory policies against them by the government or so, but because of the overall instability, of the intimidation, because of the sectarian tension, and the lack of services, the lack of security. As for trafficking, really it could be, I'm not denying it, but I don't think it's at high level, because these people already are leaving the country to Jordan, to Syria, to other countries. We are doing our best to ensure their return. And even we are arguing with the United Nations or UNHCR and other international organizations not to call them refugees as such, with the hope that they will come back to their country as soon as possible. And we are providing support for the Jordanian and the Syrian government financially and even in terms of oil supplies to support their infrastructure, to see them come back, you see, and to see their presence there is temporary, is not permanent. Thank you.
Sir.
Yes, good evening and thank you very much, Mr. Minister. My name is Yoichiro Ikeda, studying at Kennedy School as a Master of Public Policy candidate. And today I feel extremely lucky to be able to hear your voice directly. Thank you very much. And my question has to do with the international collaboration for rebuilding Iraq, as you mentioned in your speech. My country, Japan, decided to send self-defense force to southern part of Iraq to rebuild the place. Although I personally believe that Japanese troops played a positive role to rebuild the place, it's also true that there are many controversy over the decision. So my question is, how do you evaluate the role and the work that Japanese troops made in your country, and what do you expect to international society and Japan to make your nation move forward to more fully democratized, prosperous, and peaceful nation? Thank you very much.
Japan has been the strongest and closest ally and partner of the new Iraq. I mean, both in terms of military support, both in terms of financial support, humanitarian support, and even as a donor country. In fact, Japan has delivered each and every pledge they have made to my government. So we appreciate that very much. Even the presence of the self-defense force was symbolic, and it was the first time Japan sent its armed forces abroad. But I think they carried a very honorable mission there in the south, and they returned home safely. They did not suffer any fatalities or casualties, and we helped really to facilitate their return also. But Japan is still engaged and committed with us. It has been very supportive in all the international forums with the new Iraq, and there has been a number of visits between Iraqi leaders and Japanese leaders both ways. So we consider our relation with Japan as a developing one. And what the Japanese did, in fact, by this engagement, was an investment in their future relations with Iraq. So we are very happy, very pleased about the level of Iraq-Japanese relation. Thank you.
The student up here.
Shaloha. My name is Ari Cole, and I'm a mid-career here at Harvard. I'm a physician also in Martha's Vineyard and Kona, Hawaii. My question, Mr. Minister, has to do with your beautiful children in Iraq. As a physician, I care for life. According to the Norwegian Institute recently, they had statistics showing that roughly 4 to 5% of your children and your beautiful children of Iraq were malnourished. And the BBC recently had a study result showing roughly 8 to 10% of your children were malnourished or hungry. In the words of our great spiritual leaders of the Torah, of the Old Testament, of the New Testament, of the Quran, our children are our future. How can we in the first world help your children have good nourishment, good food, clean water? How can we help you more, your beautiful children of Iraq, Mr. Minister?
Thank you very much. Well, definitely you can help, and I believe that there is a great deal of goodwill with you and other people throughout the world, you see, to come to the aid of Iraqi children. We are doing our best as a government, in fact, but you see, sometimes very difficult to explain to you the kind of violence or terrorism we are facing. Those children also have been targeted by terrorists, you know. Hospitals, you know, facilities, I mean, you name it. But this is not an excuse to say that really we should not do a better job, let's say, to improve living conditions or to do, not to allow malnutrition of Iraqi children. But I really will question those statistics, you know. I mean, they are snapshot, they are selective. I'm not denying it at the same time, but I think we have suffered from this kind of statistics in the past. I think there are many ways you could help. You see, there is the Iraqi Red Crescent Society that has been active directly through the Iraqi Health Ministry. Also, any aid and assistance could be changed. We have taken an issue with an organization like UNICEF, for instance, and that's why the new mandate of the United Nations was expanded recently to urge those agencies, specialized agencies, to come and establish themselves inside Iraq, not to run their operation by remote control from Jordan or from Kuwait and so on. So I think there are many ways you could help, but your help would be appreciated very much. Thank you.
Gentleman up here.
First of all, Mr. Zebari, thank you so much for coming here today to speak to us and to take our questions. My name is Charles. I'm a student at the college here. My question to you is, in his second inaugural address back in 2005, President Bush said, freedom by its nature must be chosen. And in hindsight, it almost seems that the people of Iraq had very little choice necessarily in American intervention there. What would you say, obviously there's a lot of diversity in opinion, but what would you say are the major bodies of opinion among the Iraqi people today on the American presence, and how does that affect the way you as foreign minister enact foreign policy?
Well, definitely we take these views very seriously, but the Iraqi have really struggled very hard, you see, to attain their freedom. And sometimes people have short memories. When they say that the American intervention in Iraq has brought misery and death, violence, disruption of their life. But I'll never ever forget that day when we voted for our freedom or for our future. 12 million Iraqi embraced democracy and came out in defiance of death, of threats, and decided to vote for their future. So that is very strong, and still, and all the sacrifices now is being given, really, many of us who were deprived of this freedom in the past recognize it's not easy. I mean, I think there would be even more sacrifices along that road to reach a stable, secure Iraq. But definitely the Iraqi have chosen, I think, have made their choices of what kind of system, a regime they want to live. And President Bush, I think, reinforced that desire. I don't see any contradiction between the two.
We will do two more questions and we'll start over here.
Hi, I'm Wafa Saad. I'm a student here in the mid-career program. Minister Zebari, in your address, you said that the social fabric in Iraq is very, very strong. And my question is related to the protection of minorities in Iraq. Especially, we hear a lot of reports about persecutions of Christians, especially Assyrians, Chaldeans, and other minorities. So I'd like to know, what is the effort that is done currently by your government to ensure, these rights are protected? And also related to some policies, today we heard in the Al Hayat newspaper that in Kirkuk there's a lot of policies around paying non-Kurds money to leave the region and go elsewhere. And close to 10,000 families have been leaving recently. So I'd like to hear your views on these matters, and how in a future Iraq, what will be the best policies to ensure a better future?
Yes. Well, I'll give you one example, actually. Recently, when the Iraqi soccer team won the Asian Cup, you see, you could see how all Iraq, from north to south, came together to support their team over, this 1 or 2 weeks of this. So Iraqi national identity, I think, is still alive. It's not dead, as many people think. And secondly, the social fabric is still strong, really. I mean, when we talk about the sectarian division, I mean, there has been intermarriage between the Shia, the Sunni, between the Kurds, the Arabs, and so on. So it is there, actually, although we have seen many attempts to break those relations, but they haven't succeeded, in my view, still. Secondly, on the right of the minorities, yes, constitutionally, the Iraqi government, I think, is responsible, and I think there are very clear references in the Iraqi constitution and the Iraqi laws to protect the minorities and not to allow any religious discrimination. I mean, the Christians who have left Iraq, like many other Iraqis, whether Shia, Sunni, or even Kurds, really not because of their faith, but also because they were the targets also of these terrorist attacks on churches, on those Christians, on those Iraqis who work with the coalition. They are kidnapped, they are intimidated, they are killed, and so on. So, but the government does not have any policy, in fact, to discriminate against the Christians or to force them out of their homes. I will really strongly oppose any such allegation. On the second part, there is a process in Kirkuk. I think what you are referring about those non-Kurds who would be repatriated to their homes. These people were brought by Saddam Hussein through a deliberate racial policy to live in Kirkuk region, to change the demographic composition of the city. And this is being done voluntarily. I mean, nobody has forced these people. In fact, originally they've come from the southern provinces. They are paid compensations to go back and restart their lives. And this is within the constitutional procedures that is being followed. So it's not been, they have not been forced out of their homes because of their background. Okay, thank you.
For our last question, gentleman here.
Good evening, Foreign Minister Zebari. My name is Lieutenant Colonel John Tien, United States Army. I'm here this year at the Kennedy School as a National Security Fellow and recently returned from Iraq in February 2007, where I served in Tal Afar and Ramadi. First thing I'd like to say is thank you not only for coming here tonight to speak to us, but also for serving as a thoughtful and dedicated servant in the Iraqi government alongside other thoughtful and dedicated people in the Iraqi armed forces, civil servants, and of course, soldiers and civilians from the U.S. and the coalition forces, so thank you. You've spoken very eloquently tonight about not withdrawing military forces from Iraq. You've written about that as well in the past. Aside from military support from the United States of America, if you had one thing to choose that the United States government could do outside of military support, and is not a program that currently exists, what would that be? From another department or somewhere else within the U.S. capability?
Well, I think the United States can contribute a great deal, you see, to the rehabilitation, reconstruction of Iraq. I mean, apart from the military, definitely, I think Iraq will need the partnership, the friendship of the United States for a long time, as many other countries in the region want that. In fact, we are being invaded by many countries because of our close relationship with your great nation. And I personally believe that the United States will contribute a great deal in the reconstruction process of Iraq that hasn't gone well from the beginning. And I believe there are many areas that can be improved and enhanced. That is the one area I think Iraq will need. The recent successes, for instance, in Anbar province against Al-Qaeda, the Sunni Arab tribes have turned up against those intruders, foreign fighters. Unless it is sustained by services, by jobs creations, by improving in living conditions, it cannot be sustained. So that is the other area really I would strongly recommend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, on behalf of the Institute of Politics, I'd like to thank the Foreign Minister for his thoughtful address and his very forthright response to questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The meeting is adjourned.